Good morning, everyone, and thanks for joining us for Grandparents Raising Grandkids. What do we know and how can we help? I'm Kelly Caseman, the Executive Director of Think Kids. We're going to spend the next hour talking with these three fantastic panelists about they will help us conceptualize and understand the process grandparents go through when interacting with the child welfare courts and foster care systems. You're welcome to write questions or comments you have in the comments below the video, and we'll get to them as the conversation progresses. Maddie Lavoie, our social media volunteer, will be joining us today and will help keep an eye on what you're writing. We'll share them throughout the hour. I'll introduce the panel in a minute, but first I'd like to talk a little bit about the project, addressing the unmet needs of kids affected by the drug crisis. It's funded by the Greater Kanawha Valley Foundation. We're in our second year of it, and our work is to articulate and elevate the needs of these kids as they are identified by community stakeholders. Over the past year, we've had a majority of our participants express that the needs of grandparents should be a priority of the project, and so we invited some of our state's experts on the cause to join us today to get a better understanding or perhaps a wider perspective on what these folks are experiencing as they raise their grandkids, which, as we know in West Virginia, often happens as a consequence of the drug crisis. And with that, I'd like to introduce our guests and ask them to share some information about themselves and how they interact or assist grandparents in the systems that serve them. Let's go in alphabetical order. So we'll begin with Andrea Darr.
Good morning. Thanks for having me on this great panel with all these wonderful people. My name is Andrea Darr. I'm the director of the West Virginia Center for Children's Justice at the West Virginia State Police. I have a couple of grants that look at the investigation, prosecution, and resolution of child abuse cases. We want to respond better, faster. We want better outcomes for kids, and we want to do it in a way that doesn't cause further harm. To that end, we created a program called Handle with Care. And Handle with Care is a program that alerts schools when first responders have been on the scene of an incident and children were present and they might be experiencing trauma as a result of that. So schools are just getting the heads up, Handle with Care with absolutely no details to help these kids. So on my journey through everything that I just explained to you, we've discovered that there is a big population of transient and displaced children that can't live with their parents because it's not safe, and a lot of times they bounce around from family member to family member and often end up with the grandparents. So as I figured all this out, I found Bonnie Dunn, who does Grandfamilies in West Virginia, which is a wonderful program to help grandparents understand how to raise their grandkids during this time. So that's how I got here, Kelly. That's my path. So I'll pass it to the next person.
Awesome. Thank you so much, Andrea. Next up is Bonnie Dunn.
Thank you for this opportunity, Kelly. And yes, Andrea and I have been working together on this from the get-go. She's been a great champion of what we started here, and we champion her cause as well. I am the extension specialist at West Virginia State University Extension Service. I'm family and consumer science, but also 7 years ago, along with Dr. Brenda Wamsley, who then was the chair of the Department of Social Work here at West Virginia State, we wrote a grant to develop a model program to help individuals who were raising children that were not their own. And basically that's called kinship care as a whole. But as we submitted the grant to USDA, they asked us to focus solely on grandparents who were raising grandchildren. And a lot came from the biological connection and the different dynamics of the family structure when grandchildren enter into a permanent relationship and housing and home life with a grandparent, because grandparents at that point become mom and dad. And so the dynamics of the family changes. So what we have done, we're going into our 7th year. The first 3 years was the pilot project. We had no idea that this thing would grow the way it has. We have gone beyond our capacity just about to even handle it. However, I will say that I believe every grandparent who's ever contacted either my office or one of the other 54 offices in the state has received the assistance that they need. We are a program that provides advocacy, intervention, a point of contact. Finally, grandparents have someone to turn to. So I'm looking forward to this hour of sharing with everyone all the different resources that we have to offer and the types of support services that we give.
Great. Thank you so much, Bonnie. And next up is Pamela Woodman-Kaehler.
Kelly, thank you. And good morning to everyone who is listening or viewing. I am delighted to be here to share however I can and be helpful however I can. I'm Pamela Kaehler. I am the West Virginia Foster Care Ombudsman. And that is not a word that people toss around regularly. So in order to make it a little bit more understandable, what I usually let people know in my elevator speech is that we are essentially the concerns and complaints department that is targeted to assisting those who are touched by the child welfare system generally and who are involved or touched by the foster care system specifically. In terms of the mission statement of our unit, we are an independent, impartial, and confidential resource, and we advocate for the rights of foster children and foster and kinship parents, definitely including our grandparents. We investigate and resolve complaints, and we make recommendations for systemic reforms and improvements. We have a very significant proportion of those who contact our office by email or by phone or both that are grandparents. Some of them are not caring for, but care very much about their grandchildren. And many of them are actually caring for either part-time or full-time their grandchildren. So we get lots of inputs from this very important and very giving group of people out in our community. Our unit, we developed recently a tagline, and it goes like this: voices heard, people empowered, systems informed. And so that's what we're really trying to be and do at the Ombudsman office. And as we work our way through the program that Kelly has developed for you this morning, I'll try to give you more information about what our unit is and does and how we attempt to be helpful in our community. Thank you.
I am so thankful to have all three of you with us today. And before we jump into the questions, Maddie, is there anything on Facebook?
Nothing so far, Kelly.
Great, thank you. Okay, question one. We talk a lot about trying to see the drug crisis in our state through the eyes of a child, which is always a struggle for us to kind of reshift that lens. So let's shift that lens today and help us see the drug crisis through the eyes of grandparents. The proportion of children living in grand families has doubled in the United States since 1970, and the reasons are often sad and sometimes tragic. So from your vantage point, how is it affecting them?
Well, I think I will take this question first. After having worked with hundreds of these families, in the pilot project, we found out that 88.8% of the grandparents were in the situation because of the opioid crisis. The effects are tremendous on a grandparent. And I think this is what USDA was, one of the things they were seeing is that, so the grandparent is facing the struggles of having a child in addiction. And so that in and of itself is an extremely emotional toll that it takes on them because they feel as if they failed in parenting or my child wouldn't be, in this situation. And so now how I can possibly parent the second time around and do it right if I failed the first time, which is not the case. This is one of the things that we talk to them about, because as we all know that the drug addiction has no respecter of persons, demographics, it runs the gambit. But it has a really plays a big part on this family life, because that grandparent is thinking about what's going on with the child. They're worried about their child, but then here they are handling all these children, which was in the program. We had grandparents who were raising 7 grandchildren, and the national average is 5 per family. Our average was 2.5 in the pilot program, but then that was only 125 people. So primarily the reason they're doing this is because of the drug crisis, and the effects are long reaching, because not only does it affect the grandparents, but if that child, if there's other siblings, there's issues there, there's sometimes controversy, there's conflict, because a brother or sister is mad because mom and dad's having to raise the children of a sibling, and they shouldn't be having to do this. And in some cases, folks, it's great grandparents, and in a few cases, we had great grandparents raising great grandchildren. So you can just imagine the family dynamics as this thing keeps rolling and building, and how it affects the family structure as a whole.
Kelly, can I go next?
Sure.
I just wanted to talk. I've been doing this for several years, but my first experience with grandparents raising grandchildren was back in 2004, 2003 or 2004. And I was a victim advocate in the prosecutor's office, working with victims of crime, violence, and abuse. That's when the meth lab epidemic hit really hard. I don't know if everyone remembers that, but meth labs were everywhere. And I would be in the courtroom in felony preliminary hearings, and there would be grandparents in there with their children who were facing a preliminary hearing, and these grandparents were raising these grandchildren. And the children would want to be out on bond, and the grandparents would put up surety bonds, which is property bonds. And when you're addicted to drugs, that's everything you're focused on. And these grandparents would put up surety, which means their house, and if their children didn't show up to court, they would lose their house. And I remember sitting there just going, oh my gosh, this is so tragic. But Bonnie, I don't know if you remember those days. It was very sad.
Yeah, I do. And, along that same line, I was reminded of during the pilot project, one grandmother gave a little testimony, and her daughter was in recovery, and she's raising the grandson, and they asked her to come to a counseling session with the daughter. And so they went through all this process, and they said to the mother, "You are an enabler." And she admitted, she said, "I'd never heard that term. I didn't know what that meant." And they explained it to her. And she said, "Well, I just thought I was loving my child by giving her $20 or $40 or putting your house up," as you were talking about, because the parents have not, they at that time were not realizing what this was doing. I think that more education as the years have gone on, and the more we talk about this, they're seeing that they just can't keep being that loving parent to a drug addicted child that they had always been. And many cases we've seen, as these grandparents have talked to us, this is what they were doing. They were enabling, but once they were educated, they quit because they were not going to put themselves at risk. And it's hard to do when you love your child. It's that tough love, and that tough love is very difficult. So,
Kelly, the last part of your question, if I remember correctly, was how is it affecting them? So I was thinking when you said that about the word that comes to mind, what's the adjective? And the adjective that comes to mind that both Andrea and Bonnie had mentioned too was, I think, conflicted. Grandparents, great-grandparents feel and express as complainants to our unit, and hundreds of them expressed to me in my work as a child protective services worker for 4.5 years out in the Harrison County area, that they feel very conflicted. Conflicted, why? Because guilt by association. What are other people going to think of me and my capacity to care for these kids when my own child got into this kind of behavior that ultimately resulted in either a removal of the children or some decision that has the children in my care instead of their own parents' care. So there's that sense of what are other people going to think of me, and how do I feel about myself when my child has a drug or substance use disorder problem. Conflicted because I'm wary and hyper vigilant about the fact that at any moment on any day, for any reason, it is possible that the other shoe will drop. There is that heightened sense of awareness that something bad or worse could happen at any time, be it relational, be it financial, be it a call in the middle of the night that someone was found out in the street. It's just a hypervigilance about being afraid the other shoe will drop. Being afraid about the fact that a grandparent may suspect or know that there are things that are maybe safety risks that are happening or going on with the parent of the children or to the children. Do I report that? Do I not report that? What are the implications that will happen to everyone if I report that? If I report that, am I going to be later implicated as knowing something bad was going on, but I chose not to report it? Conflicted. Grandparents are very often expressing that they're angry with themselves or others, that they are exhausted by the mental and then the physical commitment involved, and oftentimes very defensive as well, about the fact that they know their own children well enough to know their heart and know that those folks that have a drug or addiction problem are in fact good people who love their children, even if their behavior to others may not make it look as if they do. Conflicted. Thanks.
And Pamela, with that, as we started this model program back in 2018, I'll never forget the first community-based face-to-face program we had with a group of grandfamilies. They came in and you could see them looking around the room and wondering, who are all these other people in the room? And I had someone whisper to me, is everybody in this room raising their grandchildren? I thought I was the only one. And so we soon discovered that we were developing a community of support system that these grandparents, as conflicted as they were, got together with other grandparents and realized they were not alone and that they didn't need to feel embarrassed because they were one of thousands, you know. And so you're exactly right. And that was one of the things that proved to us that the model we had developed was going to work, was going to be successful.
Those were so fantastic responses. That gives such a picture of what these parents or grandparents are experiencing at the moment. So each of you works in jobs that give you a more detailed or enriched perspective on how government systems interact and support grandkids. What would you like to share with folks watching about these systems and what grandparents experience that they probably don't or wouldn't know unless they were in these grandparents' shoes?
I probably will start this off because one of the things that we discovered early on, grandparents have not had, until recently, had a real point of contact. They don't always get the children through the system. CPS doesn't always drop them off. Sometimes they get left by the biological parent, but they did not know that there were systems to help them. And one of the things many of our grandparents who got them by default, not through CPS, they were afraid to really even let it be known because they were afraid that CPS would come and take the children. So they didn't want to start looking for help, and they were struggling because they're just on Social Security and a small retirement, or maybe just Social Security. So when we started this model program, we invited DHHR to come in and start explaining to them what services were available. And so immediately now we say to a grandparent for the first time, are you receiving the Child Only West Virginia Works check monthly to help you with these grandchildren? Well, most of them, I'd say 99%, do not even know it exists. And so we start leading them to these services. We walk them through it. Most cases these days, because of COVID and us not meeting face to face, I will send them the forms, and it's a simple 2-page form, and they fill it out, send it back to me. I send it to DHHR and make sure it gets processed. And so there is help, and that's one of the things that we kind of reversed. Where we were doing the educational 8-week program, and it's still a part of the model, but the biggest thing we need to do is to get them the resources because they're struggling. And so government is helping. And one of the things that I'm grateful for is that the legislature started supporting healthy grandfamilies yearly with some financial support to keep us going. So the grandparents do realize now, once they talk to us, because it's the very first thing we talk about is, what do you need help with? How can we help you? And let's get this moving. Because until we get the child's belly filled with food and them having what they need, they can't learn. And this is the exact same thing with these grandparents. They really need to get that stress off of their backs with needing help and finding help. So the system is there. It's not enough. I don't believe grandparents, at $417 for the first child, and it's prorated like $40 for each additional grandchild. Well, if you've got 3 or 4 or 5, come on, what's $40 a month do? But it's more than they had. So I'm not going to complain, but we are advocating that change. So that's been what we have been projecting to them about. Government is there to help you. Whether it's enough or not is another whole debate.
I might add, Bonnie, since you're talking about the one system, CPS and DHHR, I think grandparents, from what I've seen, have several systems they have to figure out. And even for us, it's hard to figure out. And if you have a child addicted to drugs, there are so many systems you have to figure out. You have to figure out how to navigate the criminal justice system. Yeah. A lot of people think if a child's not safe, you call CPS and they take your kids. That's all they think. It's just that simple. There's a civil procedure and sometimes a criminal procedure that goes on simultaneously, depending on what's going on with that kid. The education system is very confusing. So they've got the navigating the criminal justice system, the education system, DHHR and CPS, and it's hard for us. It's just hard for regular people to figure out, much less if you have the burden of trying to feed these kids. You're not sure how you're going to do this, and you don't know the language even to navigate those systems. And you, Bonnie, you do a great job with explaining that in your courses. That's one thing I love about your program, is that you help grandparents understand the systems, how to navigate it, what language there is there, and what they need to look for.
I appreciate that. I think that I need to say at this point that our model program has a social worker attached to it. And so these grandparents have the service, free service of a social worker who is independent of any system, because we hire them. We do the billable hours for that social worker to help give them support, help them be their advocate if they need it, to create intervention for them, whatever it takes, because they don't understand the language. They are afraid of the bureaucracy. Let's just call it what it is. And so that social worker holds their hand through many of these kinds of maneuvers. Navigating the legal system is another one that we talk about a lot, because Legal Aid of West Virginia is one of Healthy Grandfamilies' constant partners. And it's free legal services, because oftentimes these grandparents need legal counsel, and sometimes they need legal representation. And so we link them to The Legal Aid of West Virginia, they have been wonderful across the state in helping us. And so the grandparents, we provide just about any resource that they need. If we don't know how to get it, we start looking for somebody who can provide it for them. So point well taken on that, Andrea. And I feel good about what we do. I mean, I had a grandmother to call me last night. She called my cell phone and she's kind of half crying because she said, I just wanted to thank you again. And you know, when you have those kinds of responses, because she just buried her granddaughter, whose children, 3 children, she's raising, the great grandchildren, because the girl had been given an overdose of fentanyl. And they're looking at it as a murder. This is in Ohio. And that woman's going through a lot of tragedy right now. And she needed help when the girl died. She needed help in telling the grandchildren. So I immediately called one of our good social workers, and she went out and helped explain to the children that their mother had passed away. These are the kinds of things, and these are the tough things we do. And I went to the viewing, and it was very difficult. And so that's the far end of the kinds of things that happen. But that social worker is an important component in our program model. And we've got the social workers all over the state that help with each one of the county coalitions to help grandparents.
Kelly, I don't know that I could explain it better than these ladies already did, but what I did want to mention that I hope people would have some empathy and compassion for, particularly when the child welfare system or child protective services is involved, is with all of these different government systems, whether they're social services or legal or economic or whatnot, suddenly you have a whole lot of people involved in your life, involved in your parenting, coming into your home, making decisions for you or about those you care about that maybe you had directly made before. You don't necessarily know what the roles are of these people, the authorities are of these people, or who can help with what. And sometimes, although unwittingly and unintentionally, they give conflicting information and advice. That is a very difficult territory to navigate. And one of the implications of having government in your life that all of us that are involved in this, on this panel and outside of this panel, know is true and are trying hard to help people navigate a very complex system, lots of people, lots of information and misinformation. We want to really help people make their way through that and survive and thrive.
And with that said, I think that we need to let our audience know that once you are receiving the West Virginia Works Child Only, it opens up the door to so many resources. For instance, and I'm looking at one of my lists, you can get car repairs, $2,000, up to $2,000. You can get help with car insurance. You can get clothing. You can get driver's license and state identification cards for the children once they become of age, high school graduation assistance, childcare. I mean, it just opens up a whole avenue of resources once they enroll in and are getting that check monthly. And so, you know, you can't say enough about the fact that there are resources out there. The whole thing is for somebody to help them obtain those resources because they don't know how to go about it. And with COVID, that made it even harder. So that's why we kicked in and started mailing them the forms. You fill them out. We gave them a stamped self-addressed envelope, mail them back to us. I scanned them. I sent them to DHHR. I followed up to make sure they were being taken care of. So.
Well, that's a great segue into our next question. So the majority of parents raising grandkids rarely plan to be in the position and they make their way through trial and error, piecemealing financial and logistical support for these kids the best they can. So what resources are out there that you know about, perhaps aside from government or in different systems that we haven't talked about, that these folks can access?
Well, I've recently had a lot to connect with the word connect to the connect group. I know a lot of counties have, that's why each county has a Healthy Grandfamilies Coalition. They have everybody in that county who can offer any kind of a resource as a part of that coalition, so that when something comes up, a situation arises, a need arises, that they have people that they can refer them to and get that assistance. Here in Charleston, I recently made a partnership with Mission. Oh my, I'm going to have a senior moment. Mountain Mission on the west side. That's what happens when you get old. And I have been able to send a lot of people there for food, for furniture, for clothing. I mean, a whole variety of resources. And so we look around the communities and see who can help. And what we have seen in some counties, for instance, Harrison County, which I think Pamela said she was in at one point, has got a dynamic program going. Harry Green Chevrolet wrote a check for $10,000 to the Healthy Grandfamilies program so that they could reach out and help. And so we're finding that businesses, a variety of entities in these county locations are helping support this mission that we have to help these grandfamilies. So what we need to have is, if you're a grandparent raising grandchildren watching this and you need help, then you need to get to your county coalition coordinator, and you can actually find that on healthygrandfamilies.com. There's the list of all the counties, or call my office and I will direct you to that. And I don't know if this is the time, but that phone number is simple. It's area code 304, and it's 204-4007. So, or call West Virginia State University's main line and ask them for the Grandfamilies office.
There are so many different resources. It probably would be difficult and impractical to get into the detail of those in this particular venue, Kelly, but just for awareness, some of them have already been mentioned, but some of those that we refer people to or connect people to that happen to interface with our office are Help for West Virginia, the Help for WV. There's that telephone number. There's also a website. They have access to a mobile crisis response unit for when youth in the home are having escalating behaviors, concerning behaviors. You don't really know what to do. You don't want to call the police, but you need some help. Maybe things already have escalated to the point of scary. Someone may hurt others or threaten to or be hurting themselves. Don't know what to do. We refer people to the mobile crisis unit through Help for West Virginia all the time. In fact, we ask people to put that right in their cell phones as a contact so that when they need it, they can just press the button. They don't have to try to remember it or search for it. We have them put that in their phones with the word crisis as the contact name, so they can just get that access to help immediately. I think Bonnie mentioned Mission West Virginia. You can Google that. They have relatives programs. They have kinship care booklets. They have a resource if you're in the child welfare system with a foster youth in your home called a kinship navigator that can be assigned to you or that you can request. You don't have to wait for someone to do it for you, that can help hold your hand and connect you with a ton of resources, both inside and outside of government systems. So I highly recommend connecting with Mission West Virginia, whether you're a grandparent caring for children involved in the child welfare system formally or not. The legal aid, as Bonnie said, is amazing. They have all kinds of things, including a kinship care hotline, 304-414-5449 for people who are sitting here with a pen and paper next to them. Every child who is in foster care is covered by the Aetna Mountain Health Promise insurance. And those kids all have a dedicated Aetna case manager. That case manager can provide help and resources and tangible supports to families. Most people don't know that, but that case manager also can connect you to a dedicated legal support service that is offered through Aetna Mountain Health Promise. For those who have a pen and pencil, 888-348-2922, and you say, I need some legal consult, maybe even legal representation. If it's a foster child and it is a person providing placement services for that child, that kind of representation can be entirely free. There are all kinds of other things out there. One I will mention because it's new and I think it's amazing, helping with anything having to do with issues with the education system or the education or schools process, is a new group with the Department of Education called Education Recovery Specialists. They are here to help families and foster youth with anything whatsoever involving barriers, concerns, or issues involving school and education. They're fantastic. Their phone number, brand new service, 304-326-7301. Bottom line is there's all sorts of things out there. We just need to have lots of folks like people on this panel and others and Kelly to help bridge the gap between the need and the service. There's lots of great things out there.
I'm going to add one more resource, and that's 211.
Yes.
211 is out there, and they have, all you have to do is call 211. Also text, I'm not sure what that number is, but all you have to do is call 211 and you get a live person. A lot of times we want a live person to talk to, but they have lists of all kinds of resources. It could be food, it could be shoes, it could be help with utilities. It could be I'm about to get evicted, what do I do? But 211 is now operated by the United Ways of West Virginia. The United Ways now have an association. They meet 3 times a week. They're all getting on the same page. They're working so hard to make sure that the resources are up to date in 211. So just want to remind everyone, 211 is a great, simple, fast resource with a live person.
I use that myself and refer people to it, Andrea. Thank you for mentioning it. In terms of support groups, in addition to Healthy Grandfamilies, the West Virginia Foster Adoptive Kinship Network. West Virginia Foster Adoptive Kinship Network. You can search that on Facebook or follow up with me or anybody on this panel for contact information to connect with that group. They are also a source of support, education, and they also do a lot of advocacy to help promote to people in positions of influence the sorts of things, advocating for the things to help you and that matter to you, to our lawmakers and others who make policy.
This is all great information. And I think what we'll do is we will compile all this information and put it together into a list that we'll put on our YouTube channel when we post this video tomorrow. So let me turn to Maddie and see if there are any questions before we jump to the next one.
Yes, Kelly. So I have a feeling you guys just addressed a few of them, but we had actually a few viewers express how they haven't been able, they are willing / really want to help, but they're being denied either by their kids, allowing them to see their grandkids, or they're being faced with not returning calls. So we have people wanting to help, but are being denied. And then a comment said, one said, and sadly many parents will say, you can have the kids, but I get to keep the benefits and money, and use the kid as a pawn to manipulate. So what you're doing is amazing, and they need to know they aren't alone. So I thought that was important to mention to you guys. But other than that, it's just several people being grateful that you guys are out here spreading information and helping them out.
So Maddie, let me see if I can recap what you said and then open it to the panel. So we have grandparents who are concerned that they don't have a right to see the child or children, and then ones who are kind of in that situation where they feel as if the parents are keeping the resources provided by DHHR, and they're the ones who are actually caring for the child, and they're wondering what they can do in that situation. Does the panel have any advice here for that?
We've seen a lot of it. The key word were there when she said they're using the children as pawns. This happens a lot. And what we have found is that the biological parents are getting the food stamps and some of the resources, but they're not giving them to the grandparents because that's who has the children. So when the grandparents say, well, I'm going to go apply for food stamps and whatever else, EBT, then the child will say, I'm coming to take the grandchildren. So they use those children as a pawn in all this, knowing full well they're probably not going to come and take the children, but they threaten the parent, the grandparent, and use that. And we've seen too much of it. And there's a systems problem. And I'm not sure, we won't get into that, how to straighten that one out at this point in time. But we've seen a lot of that with grandfamilies.
If any of that sort of thing is occurring or anything like it, and the family already is involved in any way with the child welfare system or child protective services, that really does need to be reported either through the chain of command, through the DHHR. There's a person called a community services manager that is sort of the responsible person, the most responsible person right now at a DHHR office for all the functions that run through that office. And every office has one. You don't need to know their name. You just call the office and ask for the person that's most in charge. And that's something that you can work through the chain of command there. Or people can reach out if they are afraid or not quite sure what to do to our office, and we'll see that we can try to help them through that. And there are ways to help resolve that. But if someone is not involved in the child welfare system, very often, if I hear that kind of thing happening, I really recommend that they connect with an attorney. There are a variety of mechanisms to be able to access some at least free consult there, some legal consult, advice, or referral. There are some potential legal mechanisms to help deal with that, and may not be perfect, but when empowered with that information, that can often help people a lot.
Great, thank you for those responses. And I would just say one more thing, and it's something that I've heard over the years since probably around 2015, and it's this misinformation that once a child is introduced to the system, that they may very well be taken from the entire family and wind up in a different county and you don't have rights. And I think that that's really kind of been stoked by fear and perhaps some manipulation. And that's not been my experience at all. I think that, you know, the state is certainly more, but never really had an intention of trying to take children completely away from their loved ones and their family. And I think there's a real diligent effort to ensure that they're connected with family. And so if you're shy of getting in touch with the state or to solicit representation, I think that's important to know.
There has never been a time where this is a time where there is stronger statutory language in West Virginia code, in state law, regarding responsibilities on the part of the department and regarding the preferences that need to be exerted to have youth either stay with or be placed with kinship or relatives. Not only is there statutory language to that effect throughout code, but there is a Bill of Rights for foster and kinship parents and for foster youth that indicate very clearly that first and foremost, they should have the opportunity to be placed with relatives and kin. And until we really start to push on that right and have some legal and judicial weigh in on the activities in real life that surround those rights actually being real, we won't see the fruit of the effort by our legislators to endorse that very, very important and very humane intention to have kids remain connected to their families whenever it is safe and possible.
It's really helpful. Thank you, Pamela. Let's move to the next question because I think that it segues well into the conversation we're having. Some grandparents are direct or peripheral players in ongoing court battles. Do you have any information to share to help us better understand what that can be like, and if there are resources or support groups out there that can help grandparents through that process?
For us, it's where the social worker actually plays a role more than anything else. The better court battles, well, they're not court battles, the better court cases that I've been involved in is where grandparents have decided to adopt the grandchildren, and I've been invited to those hearings, which is a wonderful thing. But for the more negative kinds of things where there are these battles, our social workers are usually the ones that are involved with that to offer support.
I think one of the things that is that really just needs emphasis is when and if a court is involved in a child protection or juvenile abuse and neglect matter, almost always the first priority, the plan is to attempt reunification, to attempt to help the parent or parents correct the conditions that cause the removal of the children so that they can be reunified with the children. And sometimes the efforts and the length of time and the sort of the manner and process involved in attempting to drive reunification can be very lengthy, can be very frustrating, but they need to typically be tried and reasonably exhausted first before another permanency plan, like legal guardianship or adoption, can be legally explored. So I think one of the things that is frustrating in your question, what can court be like? Court can be like living on an emotional tightrope for a very long time, where people are making various decisions that are very difficult to understand. Things can move and shift and change direction very quickly. At times it seems arbitrarily, although often it is not. There's a complex body of law that needs to be situationally applied when court is involved. And there's lots of people's opinions and perspectives because everyone typically is represented by counsel and they don't always agree. So it can be stressful, it can be long, and that is why groups like Healthy Grandfamilies and other resources for support are so incredibly important, because even for those involved directly in the system, it can really wear you out.
Thank you so much. Yeah, Pamela and Andrea, just one moment, because we're about to lose Bonnie. And so Bonnie, Pamela was just talking about how stressful court can be. And we know that all of this work can really take a toll on grandparents' health. So do you have any recommendations or last words on what those grandparents can do?
And knowing the kinds of things we were going to talk about, there's two things that I want to end with. During the 8-week face-to-face program that we have, we address a topic called health literacy, self-care, and stress. And so we try to give them some systematic approaches to paying closer attention to health, because what we discovered in the pilot project was 100% of the grandparents, which was 125 cohorts in our project, presented with at least one professionally diagnosed chronic illness. So we know our grandparents are battling health issues, but once they get these grandchildren, they forget about themselves. They're so busy with getting the children up and getting them ready for school and getting them fed and trying to just figure out all these things that they just kind of forget about themselves. And so we spend 2 hours talking with them about trying to get them to circle back around and shift a focus. You're getting this support now from Healthy Grandfamilies. You've got a social worker to help you. We're trying to resolve your problems. We need you to focus a little bit back onto yourself. And we've had some success with that. We've had documentation where grandparents, they get a personal health history journal to track their health. And we had one grandfather said, you know, I looked at this and I looked at this list in this book of all the tests I should have had, and I haven't had any of them. And he was 68 years old. And so he goes to his doctor and he says, look, I am now raising 2 small grandchildren, and I need to make sure my health is such that I can hopefully live to see them into adulthood. And they found cancer. And had he not gone, that would have gone maybe undetected until it might have been too late. And so that was taken care of. And to this day, when I see that family, he sometimes will tear up talking about that. And he said, you know, you made us think about ourselves when our whole focus was children. So that is one of our topics that we cover. The other thing that I want to address before I leave is the thing with the school system. The Board of Education has been one of our primary partners, and that partnership's getting stronger and stronger. Every county has been encouraged, and most of the counties have a very strong relationship with their Board of Education, because that's where the grandchildren are. It's really kind of hard. You can't just blanket an advertisement. We've got Healthy Grandfamily Services. We discovered in the pilot that didn't really work very well. So the school system has been helping us with distributing information about Healthy Grandfamily Services by sending things home. They've identified what students are being raised by grandparents and send that information home. And that's what's caused the phone to ring off here in this office, because not only do I run the state program, I am one of a few people that runs the Kanawha County program. And Kanawha County has done a tremendous job. Dr. Williams, who is the superintendent of schools, actually, I have someone sitting in my office waiting on me in the next meeting who's from the Board of Education, and they've done a tremendous job in helping us get to these families to let them know there is help out there. And I think that's going to be one of your other questions after I get off, that yes, there is assistance for grandparents raising grandchildren. And being a person who came from that family structure, who went through the court system when there was a battle over who was going to take me, I know all too well the importance of these services and these support systems to these families. And so, Kelly, I want to thank you for the opportunity for this platform. And we welcome any grandparent to contact us so that we can begin giving them the support that they need.
Well, thank you so much, Bonnie, for joining us. And I will put information about Healthy Grandfamilies and contact information in the comments here and on YouTube. So we appreciate you.
Thank you, and goodbye to everybody. It was a pleasure to be with you.
Bye, Bonnie.
So I'm circling back to you, Andrea, and we're talking about courts.
I just wanted to mention CASA. If the court case has gotten into circuit court, court-appointed special advocates for abused and neglected children. I love CASAs in the courtroom. Pam, you were talking about all the people in the courtroom, and sometimes they have conflicting messages or conflicting opinions. And a CASA is a volunteer not connected to anybody who gets a court order and is a part of that, a part of the ongoing court hearings, and they do their own sort of fact finding and report to the judge. But I really love CASAs, and it's a volunteer situation, and they do great work. I think they would be a great resource for grandparents.
That's a great point.
Very often grandparents don't know that there is a CASA. They don't know that the children have their own attorney. They don't know that they can talk with and at times get some assistance or other things from those people. If Child Protective Services is involved and court is involved, there should be meetings called multidisciplinary team meetings occurring at least once every 3 months, but many of them do try to schedule them monthly. Multidisciplinary team or MDT meetings are something, if you are caring for the children, that you should be invited to attend. And if you are invited, you should see how you can attend, if even by telephone, because the people that can be very helpful to you often are identified in those meetings, and you can meet and speak and communicate with them, get some of their contact information. You can also request information about your CASA or the guardian ad litem attorney for the children from the CPS worker or his or her supervisor or the CSM that I mentioned earlier. So there are people to talk to, although for grandparents, very often they are last to know, which is very unfortunate. Andrea, I'm really glad that you brought them up. I've had a lot of very good CASAs in my life that made things a lot easier for me when I was caring temporarily for children in my home as well.
Full disclosure, I was a CASA when I started. That was 1997 or 1998.
We did a Facebook Live with the CASA folks on how to become a volunteer, and it was probably the most watched Facebook Live that we've done. There are a lot of people who are interested, but as always, it's making that connection, right? It's trying to find out where they are and then making sure that they get the information that they need to make that commitment. I'm going to circle back one more time to Maddie. Maddie, are there any questions or comments to share?
Yes, so we have a couple questions. What help is available for children who aren't adopted and turn 18? Do you want me just to read the questions out, Kelly, first? There's a couple of them.
Sure, but let's go to that and see if folks have an answer to that. So children who are not part of the system and turn 18, I believe she said. Do you know of resources to help them?
Andrea, I've done a lot of talking. Did you want to suggest anything and then I can go too?
Well, I think this is a question for you, but I have heard that, a lot involved. 18, they're pretty tired of all these systems making all these decisions for them. But there are programs out there. There are programs that can help these kids, that can pay for college, that can pay for a trade school, that can do a lot of things. And you probably know more about them than I do. The Modify program and things like that. Could you talk about that a little bit?
Yes. Even if a grandparent or a foster youth who is 18 or older, even if you approach an entity that typically provides resources for youth that have been in the system, if you will, or in foster care, the people that are involved in those programs know an awful lot about the services and funding streams and programs that are available for youth that haven't been in foster care. So when I get questions like this, usually I refer people to, or I directly go to the people who are involved with, as Andrea said, the Modify program. And you can Google that, and then maybe Kelly, you can include a little bit about that in the resource list that you create after this. But Modify and the funding stream behind it called Chafee, there are a lot of different programs and funding streams. There's Job Corps. There are a variety of different funding streams that may be available by applying or inquiring at the DHHR office. You can ask a youth services worker or supervisor about some of those. You can contact my office. We can put you in touch with people who have a great deal of information on the programs, services, funding streams, independent living resources that may be available. Now, they are somewhat limited, and states are really challenged to provide a greater level and degree and consistency of support to people, all people who are young adults and over 18. But there are some good things out there. Again, a little too numerous to mention on this call, but check out our call modify, call our office, apply at the DHHR office. Those are some good places at least to start and get you connected.
Thank you for that. And I think that we may want to do another Facebook Live on that, because we hear often about the needs of kids as they transition out of the system. Maddie, we're getting a little bit of feedback from you. So if you could speak up a little bit, that would be really helpful. Do you have any other questions to share?
Yes, sorry about the feedback, guys.
That's
No more questions, just a few comments. One said that legal aid is so backed up, causing people to get tired and just simply give up. Another comment, the challenge I see is the same rules aren't consistent across judges or counties. That was another one.
Thank you for those, Maddie. And I haven't heard about legal aid, and perhaps we can reach out to them and see if we can troubleshoot on an upcoming Facebook Live about legal assistance for families, if that is a concern. But we have certainly heard about the inconsistency from county to county, and perhaps the ladies can comment on that. I've heard it for years, and I'm not sure the way, at least for advocates like us, can broach the issue.
Pam, I think that's a question for you.
Okay, I could talk all day long and twice on Sunday on this subject, Kelly, but I know that we're Facebook Live and we don't have forever. We don't have that kind of time. That might be a subject that we can incorporate into a future type of a panel meeting. But what I will say is one of the important functions of the Foster Care Ombudsman Office is to make very kind of visible and clear the sorts of experiences, feelings, and perspectives of the public as they experience the foster care or child welfare system when they're involved in it, so that those sorts of inconsistencies, if they are the kind that really shouldn't be happening, can be made known to people who are in leadership and who make policy, who effect policy, who practice in legal and judicial. We're trying to make sure that that kind of information that really fleshes out those sorts of inconsistencies is made visible and more clear, so that if they should be addressed, that they can be addressed. That's really one of the important parts of the work of this office, is to capture that data, aggregate it, analyze it, and share it with others so we can better understand that problem to solve it. You can't hit a target that you can't see. That said, there's always a balance that's kind of difficult here. Issues involving children and their families are very personal, and we may talk about substance use disorder, and we may talk about opioids, and we may talk about different things, but everyone's situation is not created equal. A label does not describe what's happening inside of that household or with those people. So we want to really try to handle child welfare related cases individually, personally, compassionately. We really want that. And so there needs to be the judicial discretion and the legal discretion to be able to individualize case plans, service plans, and decision-making. At the same time, everything really is to at least conform to a consistent body of policy that is typically driven by a body of law. And so we're trying to balance a consistency among policy and law that is written and that needs to be interpreted with some level of consistency, we hope, but at the same time provide a high level of individualized and personal service, help, and support. It's tough, it's complicated, and it's not simple. But to the extent that we can get our arms around what appear to be inconsistencies that do need to be brought in line or approached or discussed or rectified. I know that there are a lot of groups, the Court Improvement Program, our program here at the Foster Care Ombudsman Office, the Child Welfare System, and some of certainly its new leadership, our legislators, offices like Andrea's, and even the work that Kelly's doing. We're really trying to bring visibility to this so that we can better understand it and when it's appropriate, help to promote recommendations to fix it. In the meantime, continue to report it. That's the only way we know what's going on in the field.
That was wonderful advice. Thank you so much. We are a little past time. So I'd like to thank Andrea, Bonnie, and Pamela for joining us today. Keep an eye on our Facebook page. We're going to share some links to information about the project, as well as we heard so many resources today. We want to make sure that you know how to access those. So we'll put those in the comments, and then we will post this video on YouTube tomorrow. So feel free to share it with colleagues and friends. And also thank you, Maddie, so much for joining us from Washington State. So on behalf of Think Kids, thanks again and have a great day.
Thank you.
Thanks, bye.